the day. Actually, I'm going to go off script here for a second and say that District Governor Hanley was present for the charter dinner of the Indian Land Lunch Club that Greg and I joined when we first moved here, or it was the first Rotary Club we joined here in South Carolina. And that was the year, those of you who are around know that he wore this very large, very blue, very fuzzy hat everywhere he went. And I asked him before you all came on if, oh yes, Petronel, I will definitely share the picture with you. Thank you. I asked him if he had it handy, and he said he was required to retire the hat at the end of his district governor year, which I thought was very sad because he's very tall, and then the hat made him about 7 feet tall. So you could spot him in any crowd. Anyway, sorry you don't have the hat, but we're still really welcome to have, we're delighted to have you. So you have almost 40 years experience as an environmental consultant, providing wetland delineation and ecological surveys, plus compliance auditing and program development, expert testimony, which always probably makes you feel like you're under the gun a bit, and then pollution prevention. You're a member of the Rotary Club of Greenville City Center, and you did serve as the president of the Rotary Club of North Greenville. You've been the District 7750 assistant governor and then the district governor in 2019 and 2020. Yes, the DG with the big blue hat. You put that in your bio. You currently serve on the District Environmental Committee, and your wife Lillian and you have been married for 39.5 years. Now there's a scientist for you. You have 3 children, 3 grandsons, and you share your house with Bailey, an adopted Australian Shepherd, working fine. So, past District Governor Hanley, it's all yours.
Thank you, Candace. I'm going to share my screen, I hope, and let me know once I click. There we go. Are you seeing a kayaker?
Yes, we are.
Good. So, as I said to Candace, I offered to give a talk on South Carolina water supply planning because I serve on what's called a basin planning council. So as I was preparing the presentation, though, I thought maybe it would be better to go through some of the reasons why water is so important. And those of us that have gone through the sciences, we were told water is a universal solvent, and indeed, many things dissolve nicely in water. One of the unique properties of water is it is densest around 0.5 degrees C. And the reason that's important is that's why ice floats. If ice didn't float, then our northern lakes would freeze solid in the winter as opposed to having ice floating over the water, and that allows the critters in those lakes to survive. Water is necessary for life as we know it. There may be other forms of life, but because our chemistry works with chemicals that are soluble in water, we need that water to move things around and help our chemical reactions occur. Water is most of our body mass. We are mostly water. Water also can be challenging because it carries things like pathogens. And that's one reason Rotary is very involved with clean water programs, is to help communities get clean water to avoid especially childhood diseases. Our district is very involved in Honduras, providing clean water and drinking water supplies to remote villages that otherwise would not have access to clean water. And that brings me to the last little bullet here. 2 billion people, 20% of our world's population, don't have access to clean water. Personally, I think that number is a little low. Those of you that may have traveled in other parts of the world that have potable drinking water systems, and I think of Indonesia in particular, you will still see people in those areas who, instead of going to the tap, they are getting water or bathing in water that is in very foul-looking rivers and streams and ditches. There's a lot of water on the Earth, but where is it? This is a source from the United States Geological Survey. And as you can see, almost all of the water in this world is in the oceans. And the challenge with that is we can't safely drink ocean water for two reasons. One is it's too salty, and our kidneys don't work with those salts. But the other reason is not only do our kidneys not work well with those salts, but those salts would make us have diarrhea, which makes our water balance even worse. So only about 2.5% of the world's water is fresh water, and of that, a large portion, as you can see, is frozen in glaciers and ice caps, so that's not available to us. A large portion of the remaining is groundwater, and while some of that is available, a lot of the groundwater supplies are actually not potable. Because of their depths, they have a lot of salts dissolved in them, and so they too would require treatment. So surface water, which we think of as drinking and bathing, even a lot of that is not available to us. A lot of that is frozen in ground ice and permafrost. And then that remaining part, the 20% in lakes, the 0.5% in rivers, that's where a lot of us get our potable drinking water from. So that's where the water is. The challenge is most of it isn't usable by usans. Okay, there we go. Now, South Carolina is a fortunate state, as are many states east of the Mississippi River, in that we do have an abundant source of water, which comes from the rain. So as you can see, going from northwest to southeast, along the Blue Ridge Escarpment in the high parts of South Carolina, there's enough rain that is almost equivalent to a temperate rainforest. There's so much water that falls on the Blue Ridge Mountains. And then as you move to the east, the amount of rainfall drops off a good bit in the central part and then increases again toward the coast. But even so, 45, 40, 50 inches of rain a year is plenty of water to provide the water that we need for drinking water. And in fact, as this slide shows, most South Carolinians get their drinking water from a surface water source. These little spigots here show surface water sources in South Carolina public water systems. Again, you can see that most of the public water systems in the state, especially up of the northwest of the fall line, get their drinking water from surface water sources. So they're basically putting a straw in a river or a stream or a lake and treating that water for drinking water quality. On the other hand, if you look at where public water systems get groundwater, you can see, again, the fall line is running basically from Aiken up towards Charlotte, and there are a lot more drinking water wells in the southeastern part of the state than in the northwest part of the state, and that's because of the geology. Very different geology in the northwest part of the state than the southeast. Well, why are we concerned? Unfortunately, we can't control everything in this world, and one of the things we can't control is how much rain falls. Some of you may recall in 2008, there was a tremendous drought, statewide drought, and lakes like on the left, that's Lake Hartwell, and you can see the sticking up on the right side, that's a buoy that is a channel marker. Ideally, that buoy is not out of the water, it's in the water floating a channel. And as you can see, that channel is not only is mostly dry. And then on the right side is a photograph from Lake Marion and boat ramp entrance. Well, you can see the boat ramp entrance also is out of water. So one of the reasons we have to be concerned is we can't control Mother Nature. And sometimes we do have prolonged droughts. We've had, since we moved here in 1986, we have had 3 major droughts, early 2000s, 2008, and again, I believe the last one was 2015 or so. The 2008 drought was certainly the worst one. And so here's another picture of Lake Marion, and you can see docks are exposed, and there's a shipwreck in the bottom of the channel there. Hard to navigate that channel when the water is that low. But not only do we have problems, a lot of, as I said earlier, a lot of our drinking water sources in the southeast part of the state come from groundwater. And unfortunately, when you pump groundwater, that water gets replenished. And if you're near the ocean, that water is unfortunately replenished often with seawater, with salt water. And so as the salt water intrudes into those freshwater aquifers, that water becomes undrinkable. And what you're seeing here is a figure from a study in Charleston, Berkeley counties. And the blue lines represent salinity. And as you can see, the salinity where it's getting worse is especially along the coast. And those are drinking water wells that one of the public water systems was using down there. And they have had to close a lot of those public water systems. Hilton Head has had to close 10 of its drinking water wells, again, because of saltwater intrusion. So even though South Carolina has abundant water available, it has to be managed wisely to, one, allow for use of water during drought conditions, and two, to protect existing groundwater resources and not overuse them. And another reason we have a challenge, as all of us know, South Carolina is growing rapidly. It is identified as one of the most rapidly growing states in the nation. This is an aerial photograph around Lyman, and all those little brown spots are new subdivisions. And that photograph changed from 2 years to the time this one was taken. That photograph is a 2022 aerial. In 2020, these brown spots weren't there, and you can see that sort of growth all over the state. It's anticipated that South Carolina's population will grow by another 1 million people by 2070, a long way out, but planning horizons for water take a long time to prepare. So it's not unreasonable to be looking a long way out. And again, as we know, most of the growth in South Carolina, the predominant growth is along the I-85 corridor and, of course, along the coast. So South Carolina is what's called a riparian rights state. And that basically means if I have property along the water, I have the right to use that water, and someone upstream from me does not have the right to deprive me totally of that use. Unlike many Western states that are water rights states, where the first straw in the water has a right to all of that water, regardless of downstream users. In South Carolina, anyone who has access to water has a right to that water. And I didn't know this until just recently, but since 1976, South Carolina has authorized the state to establish a comprehensive water resources plan. Law was enacted in 1976. It wasn't until 1998 that the first plan was developed, and it was updated following the first extreme drought in the 21st century. And then it was decided or determined by the state, by the Department of Natural Resources and the Water Resources Commission, that even that approach was not fully adequate to project out for future growth. So in 2019, the South Carolina Department of Natural Resource and the Water Resources Commission jointly developed a framework to update a statewide water planning framework. But unlike the previous framework, this one was to be based on basins, water basins. So what is a water basin? Here you can see the 8 water basins in the great state of South Carolina. And basically these basins are considered watersheds. So when you're standing on a river, all of the land that drains to that river is the watershed for that point. And these 8 basin planning councils are based on watersheds, but they're divided for several reasons. One, there are 2 in the Savannah River. The Edisto is standalone, but then the Saluda, Broad, Catawba, and Santee, they're all basically in the same drainage, but because of different water availability and use, the framework divided that particular basin into 4 different regions for planning purposes. And then there's the PD on the far east part of the state that actually is several different watersheds. But again, for planning purposes, it was determined that the PD would be one basin council. Each one of these basins will have a river basin council. That's part of the framework. And each river basin council ideally has a minimum of 25 members with different interests. So The DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, that organizes these councils, looks for people with agricultural interests, people who are in the landscaping or irrigation business, people who are in industry, people who serve public water systems, individuals who have a recreational need, and other folks with general interest. So the Basin Council, ideally, each Basin Council has people from these diverse interests, and the job of the council is to develop for that geographic area a river basin plan, looking ahead for 50 years. So far, the council that was first established and that has developed its plan is the Edisto. The Broad River Council has submitted a draft plan. I serve on the Saluda Basin Council, and we are in the process of looking at data to prepare a plan. And honestly, the Upper Savannah is just in the formation stages. And I honestly don't know where Lower Savannah, Salkehatchie, Petey, and Catawba are. I think they are somewhat in between the Saluda Basin Council and the Upper Savannah Council. The councils look at what are called demand scenarios. What are the demands placed on the water basin in which they are planning? And they develop a model around this. And I did not want to go into the details because even though it's a simplistic model, it's still pretty complex. But what we're looking at is, what is the current demand? That means, what is the actual water use for the basin? And that's based on reports that people who withdraw water have to submit to the state. So the state has data on how much water is being used from the basin. And then we look at what are called permit and registered demand. So even though I may be permitted to withdraw 20 million gallons a day, my current demand may only be 10, but we are looking at what is the permitted and registered demand, so that if everybody were taking what they were allowed to take, what would the demand be? Then we look out ahead, a moderate projection for 70 years, and that's a moderate growth projection, and then a high projection, which, as it sounds like, is just, what is a high growth projection? So those data are put into this model, which shows the triangles are water withdrawals, the circles are the triangles are reservoirs or reaches, the circles are different water withdrawals. So there's Greenville water, golf clubs. Then there are the upside down triangles that are lightish color are discharges into the river basin. So those would be wastewater treatment plants, typically, that are discharging back in the river. And the numbers from all of these are put into the model to predict what the demand will be. And that's called the surface water allocation model. And the Saluda River Basin is in the process right now of reviewing the model and looking at the inputs before we can figure out what the demand, what our projections will be. So then once we look at the demand, we look to see if there are deficits. Are there places based on current and projected need where there will not be enough water? And for our basin, the good news is, even projected out to 2070 at a high demand, the only projected deficits were a couple of golf clubs that would not be able to withdraw sufficient water for irrigation based on their current use. So our job is fairly easy, but we still, as a group, we still want to develop water management strategies. And when we talk about these strategies, the group as a whole has to arrive at a consensus. Yes, as a whole, we agree this is a reasonable strategy to manage water resources in this basin. And then the individual strategies we develop are compiled into a basin plan, and that plan is presented for public review and feedback. And then following public review and feedback, the plan is finalized and submitted back to DNR. But what's important is these plans are just that. They are plans with strategies that then other entities with a legal authority to implement would implement those strategies. So our river basin councils cannot tell, we're not set up to tell water users what they can and cannot do. But what we could do is we could recommend to the state that in order to protect the water resources in this basin, we believe that, and based on projected growth and the worst drought on record for our period of record, we believe it's appropriate to develop a drought program for this basin that says, when the drought stage reaches such and such, do this. When the drought stage reaches such and such, do another thing. Now, we can't tell the entities what to do, but those entities with a legal authority to regulate water users could then adopt a plan, or the water users themselves could adopt a plan. So that where we are right now in the Saluda River Basin is we are looking at the model before we develop any strategies. As I said, the Edisto River Basin plan has been finalized and is available. So what should you do, if anything at all? A lot of people, they just turn on the tap and they're happy it runs clean and dry. But if you live in an area that is served by public water, I certainly recommend you know who your public water supplier is. You know where they get their water. You should understand, and they have that information publicly available. What is their source of water? And you should read their water quality report. Public water systems, one of the reasons that this nation has abundant, clean, potable water is it's a joint federal-state relationship where the federal government has developed minimum standards for drinking water, but then the states are authorized to implement those standards. And so the states actually regulate public water systems, and the water systems are required to conduct regular monitoring for pathogens, regular monitoring for certain contaminants, and regular monitor. And now they're required, periodically, they're required to monitor for what are called emerging contaminants. We are finding in some areas of the country, certain chemicals are showing up in public water supplies that we hadn't come across before. That's why they're called emerging contaminants. And the federal government indicates to the states that we are prepared to take a federal regulation on this. In order to do that, we are requiring public water systems to conduct testing of these emerging contaminants. And those reports are publicly available. So I certainly recommend to anybody that they read their public water systems annual water quality report. We also recommend that people be water wise. I don't know how many of you drive through a neighborhood and you'll see on a rainy day someone irrigating their lawn. Well, the simple thing is they have an irrigation system that is set on a simple clock, and that clock turns it on and off the same time every day, regardless of how much water the lawn needs. A lot of times the irrigation systems overwater, and a lot of times the irrigation systems are watering during the rain. Irrigation systems need regular maintenance. The sprinkler heads can be broken. I go through our neighborhood and I will see sprinkler heads that are broken, and instead of watering the lawn, the water is rushing up like a geyser out of the broken sprinkler head and going down into the street. A lot of times the sprinklers aren't adjusted properly and they're watering the street because they get knocked. Leaks. It's amazing how much water you can lose from a dripping faucet. So fixing leaks. These days, we used to do low flush toilets, but these days most houses have them already, unless it's an old house that hasn't been replumbed. You can't buy the only thing you can buy these days from the store is a low flush toilet. Running dishwashers as infrequently as possible. Don't use your don't run a small load of a washing machine on a full load of water. There's just all sorts of things you can do to reduce your water use. And what's interesting is we've found in the Basin Planning Council, there are 3 or 4 water systems that are represented on the council. And when I went through environmental engineering, the design standard for a public water system was for residential water use, 100 gallons of water per person per day. And the water system, what the water system people are finding is that between new utilities, high efficiency washing machines, high efficiency dishwashers, low flow toilets, and public knowledge that they're actually finding the actual consumption is somewhere between 50 and 60 gallons per person per day. So just through steps that we have deliberately taken and steps that we unintentionally may have taken, our water use is going down for residential use, not necessarily for commercial use, not necessarily for industrial use, but residential water use is going down. But still, be water wise. And then be informed and involved. As I said, the basin planning, there are 8 basin planning councils. The Upper Savannah is just getting underway. The public meetings are all held online, so you can participate online. The recordings and the slides of the public meetings are available. I should have included the website here, and I will email the website to Candace. So we are blessed in this country with most of us having good, clean public water sources and public water supplies and public water systems that do a good job treating the water so that when we turn on the tap, we have safe, clean water to drink. But it's still important to protect this resource, even in our area where water is abundant. In particular, to protect for those times when we may not have the usual amount of water, or protect resources that are threatened by saltwater intrusion or by overuse. So it is always good to be informed and be involved. And so I know I talk fast and I know I talk a lot, but I will now be glad to take any questions with this beautiful picture of Lake Hartwell in the background.
Wow, Rob, thank you so very much. Wow. I have a couple of questions in the chat, but what I'd like to do first is open the floor to anybody else who might have something they'd like to ask Rob. And let's see, anybody? Oh, Ken, please.
Rob, that was really great. As I've said, we're from South Florida, and we are used to a thing called a hurricane. So I was thinking, what are all of the so-called disaster issues that you have to manage? Primarily, let's say, for example, what a 100-year storm looks like. I understand that there was a major storm in 2015. So how did the state handle that?
So disaster can come in several ways. The 2015 flooding, there was, my recollection, we're almost 10 years away from that. My recollection is for that particular event, there was not a lot of pre-planning. It was somewhat of a surprise. Yes, we knew there was a storm. Yes, we knew it was coming, but there were actually 2 storm systems that came together, and that's why the tremendous amounts of rain that fell in the middle part of the state occurred. So there wasn't a lot of preparation. What that did do, though, is there were so many small dam failures that the state had already had a dam safety program, but they updated the dam safety program. They required every dam in the state to be inspected, I think, over the next 2 or 3 years. Every high hazard dam, I shouldn't say every dam, every high hazard dam. And those are dams that if they fail, there's a downstream risk to human health. Primarily, that's life. If a dam failure will threaten life, that is a high risk dam. So every dam had to be inspected, and contingency plans developed so that you dam owner, the owner of that dam, excuse me, don't misinterpret what I'm saying. You dam owner, you need to find out who your downstream property owners are that could be flooded if the dam failed, and you need to develop a plan to inform them. I serve on the Greenville County Soil and Water Conservation District, and we hold easements on 5 dams, all of which are high hazard dams, and we just completed our emergency response plans. So typically, Ken, what the state will do, and I've seen different responses, I say typically, what the state will do is if there's planning ahead, the state will say, So for instance, for hurricanes, there's typically planning ahead. The state will say, hurricane coming, leave the hurricane area. And then depending on the severity of the storm and so forth, sometimes the state will have mandatory evacuations, sometimes not. Sometimes the state will call a mandatory evacuation 2-3 days out, sometimes not. So there is no one size fits all. And it depends on how the State Emergency Planning Council deems the threat and makes recommendations to the governor, because I believe it is only the governor who can initiate action in the event of a disaster. Now, the other side of the coin is drought, and the state. So this is another thing for public water systems. Public water supplies that get surface water, that have a surface water source, they are required to have a drought contingency plan, but there is no, at this point in time, there is no requirement for those plans to be regularly updated. And so a lot of systems during the last few droughts, they had plans, but they weren't necessarily implemented. So that's a long answer to your question. And basically the answer, Ken, is one, for drought planning, for disaster planning, the state does it, but the ultimate authority in making decisions regarding actions is in the governor's hands. And so from that standpoint, the risk tolerance or risk aversion tolerance of the governor determines what action the state takes to respond to a disaster.
Okay.
Great, thanks.
Well, I'm seeing several questions developing in the chat, and what I'd like to do, for starters, those who have made really great comments, I will save the text of the chat and send that back out with my follow-up email to make sure that that information gets captured after we all sign off. But what I think I will do, I'm going to save the questions that I had put in for the end if we have time. But I will go back up from the bottom, and Lene had asked, in developing the reports, does the council look at quality of streams and the impact of wetlands on available water? And if so, does this inform mitigations efforts at all?
Lene, I love that question, and I'll tell you why I love it. At our last Basin Planning Council meeting, we had a discussion about actions that some participants, some of the stakeholders take, and there was a specific discussion about some actions for livestock and keeping livestock out of streams. And some of the comments came back were, well, that's a water quality issue. But if you look at the enabling law, the law says that these basin management plans are intended to provide an adequate supply of water of a quality to meet the needs. So the answer to your question is yes. If the Basin Planning Council is doing their job, they should be looking at water quality in addition to water quantity. I will say that most of our work focuses on quantity, but there are some of us on the Saluda Basin Council who are trying to build in quality as a way to protect quantity.
Thank you. Excellent question and really thought-provoking answer. So the next one from Julia: how much does the Savannah shipping harbor dictate the flow of the Savannah River? Our Lake Thurmond reservoir goes down over 10 feet in the summer. Is that just to maintain flow for the port? Because Hartwell and Russell stay pretty similar all summer.
So let me refresh my memory. Thurmond is the lowest of the three reservoirs, downstream most of the three reservoirs. Am I correct?
Julia, can you address that?
Correct. It's the last one in line before Savannah.
Okay, so if you want to understand water management in the Savannah River Lakes, you should go to the Corps of Engineers, and I think it's the Savannah District right now has it on their website, the Corps of Engineers website. I thought about talking about reservoirs, and as I put this together, I saw it was getting too long, but those reservoirs were designed as multi-purpose reservoirs. And so when you design a reservoir, you want to look at uses and the way you allocate, and so you allocate the amount of water in a reservoir. And those reservoirs, their purposes included hydroelectric power, so there is an allocation of water in the reservoirs for hydro. They included water supply, so there's an allocation for water supply, and they included recreation, so there's an allocation for recreation. The Corps is obligated to generate so much hydropower from those three reservoirs. They have a contractual obligation to supply electrons to the grid. Hartwell is used to, Hartwell and Thurmond both have hydroelectric capabilities, as does Russell, but what Russell is used for is a little differently. So Hartwell will drop down to generate power to meet its needs. Thurmond will drop down to generate power to meet its needs. But Russell, the Corps has the capacity to pump water from Russell back up to Hartwell. And so, and I honestly don't know whether they have dedicated lines to do that or just do it through the grid. So a lot of times the way the Corps will manage Russell is Hartwell will release water to Russell, but Russell will not release that water necessarily. It will be pumped back to Hartwell at night when there's less demand, so to refill Hartwell. And so Hartwell and Russell, this is a long answer, Julie, to your question. Hartwell and Russell will show much larger fluctuations in water level than will Thurmond. The reason, there are several reasons why Thurmond would be drawn down. One is to meet the contractual power obligations. And then you are correct, there is another reason to maintain the depth of the shipping channel in the Savannah Harbor. Believe it or not, even though it's upstream from Augusta, releases at the reservoirs upstream from Augusta will affect the depth of the shipping channel in Savannah. And there's actually a third reason, and that is there are several water system intakes on the Savannah River. And some of them are critical. They cannot be turned off. And in periods of extreme drought, so for instance, the Vogtle nuclear power plant, I believe in the last extreme drought, there was concern that salt water from the ocean would actually migrate far enough upstream to affect that intake structure. So there are three reasons why you would release water from Thurmond. One is to generate hydroelectric power. One is to maintain the depth in the shipping channel. And the other is to protect water intake structures from saltwater intrusion during times of high tides.
Thanks, Rob. That was a great answer.
Wow. And it just underscores the complexity and the balancing act that everybody in charge of all this does every day. There's one more quick question, but I just had a reflection. We live on the Catawba River south of Charlotte, and we can tell when Duke Energy, I guess in this case, knows that a big storm is coming because they will try to drop the levels of Lake Norman and Lake Wylie, which is right upstream from us. And we'll get a big rush of water down because we're just below the Lake Wylie Dam. And so they're preparing ahead of time for those kinds of storms to make sure that they have the capacity to collect the water. And just that whole system of trying to juggle everything is just, boy, it's above my pay grade, that's for sure. But there's one other question from Lance, which is the Saluda River Council, is that a volunteer group?
Yes, everyone on the Basin Council is a volunteer. That is correct. We had to submit applications to Department of Natural Resources, and they balanced the selectees to make sure that every interest was approximately equally represented.
Wonderful. Well, I think we really need to invite you back, Rob. I think that's really clear. And we'll figure out, and maybe next time there'll be another topic that you're really passionate about, and we just love to hear from you. So you'll be hearing back from us about that. I will tell you that rather than give you a mug or a pen or something in thanks for being with us today, we do a little something. May and another member of ours, Julie, alternate months, selecting a little free library book, usually related for children, that's particular to our speaker. And so this one was selected particularly for you, and it's called Ecology for Kids. And thanks for your time with us today. And we really, really do appreciate your time. Fascinating topic. And having lived in both the West and the East, I think Easterners do tend to get a little complacent in terms of thinking that we have lots and lots of water compared to like Arizona and California and New Mexico. But we need to be concerned both about quantity and quality. I remember when Atlanta was extremely concerned because Lake Lanier was running dry. I forget what year that was, but boy, when you have a major metropolitan area like that, worrying about water coming out of the tap, you know that it's a big deal.
Well, it has been a pleasure to chat with the E-Club of the Carolinas. You are the best E-Club around, no doubt about it. I wish you well in getting new members. All Rotary clubs always have to work on that. Ours is no different than yours. And I also am always glad to come back and talk to Rotary clubs. Lance, thank you for your question. Yes, this is another one of my volunteer activities. And my sweet wife says, you retired, but you still are voluntold.
I like that. I do have one other screen share I would like to close out the meeting with, but before I do that, I really want to say how very much I appreciate our guests, Don and Petronella and Rob Hanley, for being with us today. It's really lovely to see you all. Thank you so much for taking your time to be with us. We do close out our meeting with the four-way test, and if you would unmute, please. We will recite together the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all? Third, will it build goodwill and benefits? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Well, everybody go out and have a Rotary day.
Thank you. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Good
My
to see you.
pleasure.
That was a great presentation. Thank you.
All right.
Great meeting, Candace.